Hello, my name is Elanor Huntington and I'm the Dean of the ANU College of Engineering and Computer Science. It's my very great privilege to have been invited to give this recorded presentation to the H2O Hack. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet today and over whose airwaves we communicate. I'm standing on Ngunnawal Ngambri land, and in fact I'm standing on the ANU campus at the foothills of Black Mountain, which I only recently learnt was previously called Black's Mountain by the settlers to this area. So called because they had been observing the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people meeting on this mountain for the purposes of engaging in cultural practice. And I think it's particularly profound and important that the Australian National University is situated at the foothills of that mountain because for 25,000 years this has been a place of the creation and sharing of knowledge. And given the topic of this particular workshop, which is all about technology solutions for Australia's water future, it's really, really important that we acknowledge and celebrate and learn from 60,000 years worth of continuous civilization where the water future of Australia has indeed been secured and looked after. So this is particularly important, I think, to all of us. So I've been asked today to talk a little bit about interdisciplinary teams and what can be achieved in them. And what I thought I'd do is come at it from a slightly different direction and come at it from the perspective of creativity. So a little story I think might be helpful here. So in the 1970s, a group of psychologists were interested in understanding the nature of creativity. And so what they did was they took 30 fine arts students and locked them in a small room with a pile of objects and said, make something. And so they did, and they just watched what the students made. And the students very quickly fell into two groups. There was the group that the psychologists called the problem solvers. They looked at the pile of objects, said, okay, I have to make something, and so they made something. There was the second group that sort of looked at the objects, sorted them into piles, didn't like the sorting, unsorted them, resorted them, made something, unmade it, remade it, and generally kind of faffed around for a bit until they actually made something fairly quickly right at the end. And they called that second group problem finders, not problem solvers. Then they got all of the pieces of art independently judged for creativity, and what they found was that in general, the works made by the problem finders were considered to have been more creative than the works made by the problem solvers. And then they circled back 10 years later and looked at career success as measured by how frequently people were displayed in prestigious galleries, the average sale price of their pieces of art, and so forth. And again, the problem finders were generally considered to have been more creative and successful than the problem solvers. And in fact, if you look across all of the literature on creativity, sort of three or four main pillars emerge, and they are that creativity rests on deep expertise, divergent thinking, confidence, and motivation. And this is relevant when we start to talk about tackling the kind of complex problems to do that will be talked about in the H2O Hack, where we're talking about big, complicated things. And particularly when we start to talk about interdisciplinary teams, which is what I've been asked to discuss. So the issue here is that deep expertise and divergent thinking can have a tendency to work against each other, because deep expertise is all about being very, very deeply embedded in ways of knowing about particular problems and particular problem sets, ways of tackling particular problems, even ways of defining particular problems. And that means that one can quickly, rapidly assess a situation, come up with a set of solutions. They will usually be reliable, great, and so they're excellent for problem solving. But if you're looking for the divergent thinking that comes from problem finding and creativity as well, then what you need is somebody who is equally expert but in a different area to kind of knock you off your railway tracks a little bit. And so that's why diverse teams are known to generally be collectively more creative than non-diverse teams, why they tend to result in better solutions to problems, because they actually craft the problem statement somewhat more carefully and more slowly and more thoughtfully. And the financial return for companies and organisations is generally higher when one has diverse teams. But there's an extra piece here. And the extra piece here is they usually need to be diverse and inclusive. So it's not particularly helpful if one has a group of very diverse people who are all experts in their field, who cannot communicate with each other, who can't constructively disagree and debate, and rather they destructively disagree or retreat into their respective corners and don't actually come together to solve a problem. So the second part of this is around inclusivity. Inclusivity is, to a large extent, the next piece that we need to talk about. There's lots of literature out there. People talk a lot about inclusive environments, and again, what tends to rest on those things are essentially a very careful degree of mindfulness and a willingness to actively engage in allyship. So if we talk about mindfulness, what I mean by that is a couple of things. The first is a degree of consciousness about how oneself actually approaches thinking about problems, how one goes about conceptualizing the world, the way that one prefers to interact with people, and where one's boundaries lie. And there is the other piece, which is about a conscious understanding about the difference between one's fast brain and one's slow brain. So the fast brain is the thing that gets accessed a lot around deep expertise, particularly when we're going very quickly, because it's the place where you've got pre-wired and pre-cooked ways of conceptualizing an issue, approaching an issue, emoting on an issue, and it's actually an incredibly powerful thing. The trick then is to allow yourself the time to then go into slow brain and reflect and think on whether or not what are the things that underpin those instinctive reactions, and to really thoughtfully and mindfully go through that. And that's the place where you need colleagues and a willingness and an openness and a degree of trust to actually be able to go through that process as a group, because that's where the divergent thinking can constructively come in, as opposed to just retreating into one's corners and shouting. And the other piece is allyship. So it is possible when one's in fast brain mode, and sometimes when backed in through slow brain mode, to not quite necessarily understand what people are how people are coming at a problem, and a lot of the books these days talk a lot about the idea that what one wants to do is have everybody pre-wired and geared to the idea that we're going to need to be active allies for folks who feel marginalised, vulnerable, called out, a little bit defensive, and help find some way through in the spirit of actually opening up conversations rather than closing them down. For anyone who's interested, there's a wonderful book called Better Allies, and not for today, but it's one of those things that I'd encourage everyone to go and take a look at. It's just a wonderful handbook for the workplace. And as a practical tip, what a lot of people encourage is that at the end of some particular cadence, be it weekly or daily or something like that, the whole team comes together to reflect on successes and not successes, and particularly articulate what makes one grateful about being in the team. It's a way of, again, opening things up and changing the mindset so that we can remember why we want to be diverse and inclusive. And so I'm going to wrap up very soon. I just want to leave you with one last thought, which is that we stand at a moment in time. If nothing else, this particular year, 2020, has reminded us that the planet may indeed be fighting back, and the problem that is being tackled in this particular workshop is an incredibly important one. The only way that we're going to be able to solve this is when we've got people who can come at this problem from a range of perspectives. That means engineers, ecologists, technologists, economists, farmers, agrarians, traditional custodians of the land, people who can think about Australia as a complex heterogeneous system where the whole thing is connected together, and we actually need to tackle this from that perspective. That means it's going to be messy, and we actually need to embrace that messiness rather than attempting to make it go away. So I guess my closing request to this group of people would be to find the right problem to solve. By definition, once you do that, then the solution will be elegant, crisp, and we will wonder what all of the complexity was about in the first place. And on that note, thank you very much, and I'm really, really looking forward to hearing what solutions come out of the next couple of days. Thank you.